In the autumn of 1907, the town of Willow Creek, a modest settlement tucked between river marshes and aging railway tracks, lived in the quiet rhythm typical for rural America of the era. Families rose with the sun. The factory whistle cut the day into strict intervals, and by dusk, the streets emptied beneath the yellow glow of kerosene lamps. It was a place where secrets rarely survived long, and community ties were believed to be stronger than misfortune. Yet the disappearance of 12-year-old Margaret Turner lingered unsolved for nearly 2 years, becoming a quiet wound in the psyche of the town. Residents remembered Margaret as a reserved child with large, observant eyes and a gentle manner inherited from her late mother. Her father, Thomas Turner, once respected as a carpenter of some talent, had withdrawn from public life after his wife's passing. Over time, townspeople noted a growing strangeness in his behavior amidst workdays, a refusal to speak with neighbors, and a noticeable decay in the state of his once well-kept home. Still, in the early 1900s, personal grief was often treated as a private burden, and few interfered. When Margaret vanished in the spring of 1905, Thomas claimed she had run away. He delivered the explanation stiffly, as though reciting something rehearsed, yet without offering any real details. With no signs of struggle, no witnesses, and no prior complaints, authorities had little ground to pursue the matter extensively. Runaway cases, too tragic, were not unknown, and with limited manpower, the sheriff's office merely filed a report and waited for leads that never came. Over time, the town accepted the story in the way small communities often accept misfortune, reluctantly, but inevitably. Rumors persisted. Some whispered that Margaret had been sent to relatives back east, others that she had perished in the marshlands. A few speculated that Thomas, sinking deeper into isolation, had done something far worse. But without evidence, suspicion dissolved into an easy silence. The truth began to unravel only in late 1907, when a series of unusual complaints emerged from Turner's neighbors. They spoke of strange noises drifting from the basement of his home, faint movements, muffled sounds that seemed too regular to be the creaks of an old building. It was Mrs. Hargreaves, a widowed seamstress living next door, who finally contacted the authorities after hearing, on a cold November night, what she believed was a child's voice. The sheriff's department, prompted by mounting concern and the unresolved disappearance, decided to conduct a welfare inspection. What began as a routine call soon revealed the depths of Thomas Turner's unraveling mind. The officers, expecting to find nothing more than a grieving father living in disrepair, instead stepped into a house heavy with neglect and disordered possessions. Dust lay thick across every surface. The air smelled of stale wood and damp walls, and the silence held an eerie weight, broken only by the officers' footsteps. When they reached the basement door, they found it secured with multiple locks, far more than any practical homeowner would deem necessary. The locks themselves were old, but sturdy, suggesting they had been installed with purpose and maintained with care. Breaking them open proved more difficult than anticipated, not because of their complexity, but because of the unsettling significance behind their presence. What the officers found in that basement would alter the memory of Margaret Turner forever and cast a shadow over the reputation of the quiet town. It marked the beginning of a case that would demand the combined efforts of law enforcement, doctors, local clergy, and ultimately the townspeople themselves, as they sought to understand not only what had happened, but how they had failed to see it sooner. Margaret Turner was not dead, nor had she run away. She had been hidden out of sight, out of reach, and out of understanding by the very men meant to protect her. And although her rescue brought relief, it also carried the heavy weight of realization. The community had overlooked the signs, ignored the oddities, and allowed a child to suffer in silence. The basement door, once opened, revealed the beginning of a long road to uncovering the truth, tending to the damage, and restoring a life nearly lost to fear and secrecy. 4 weeks after the girl's disappearance, the town of Millford lived in a state of cautious bewilderment, unsure whether tragedy had struck silently or whether some ordinary explanation would eventually rise to the surface. The year was 1907, and small communities such as theirs were accustomed to dealing with hardship but the vanishing of a child, especially one known to be quiet, dutiful, and rarely seen, wandering alone struck at the thin membrane of security that held daily life together. The constable's office was unaccustomed to complex investigations. and the limited resources of a rural township meant that much of the early search effort fell to neighbors, church members, and even school children who scoured the fields and woodlots with a kind of solemn unity that only fear could produce. For all their efforts, however, not a trace of the girl was found outside the family property, and as the days turned to weeks, suspicion began slowly, almost reluctantly, to turn inward. The father, Charles Whitlock, had always been regarded as something of an eccentric, a man prone to long silences and sudden fits of agitation. Though most attributed these traits to the hardships he had endured early in life, he had been a widower for nearly 4 years, and his grief seemed to settle in him like winter frost, cold and difficult to brush away. At church he sat alone and rarely spoke. At the general store he purchased only the necessities, avoiding conversation and keeping his eyes lowered. Few dared to imagine that such a man, despite his oddities, might be capable of wrongdoing, for the moral fabric of the era leaned heavily toward the belief that fathers, no matter how troubled, remained protectors of their offspring. Yet as the constable and his assistant collected what little evidence the situation allowed, they found gaps in Charles's account, gaps too significant to be ignored, yet too ambiguous to openly accuse him without further inquiry. The true shift in the investigation occurred only when several townspeople, among them the school teacher, the apothecary, and the pastor's wife, came forward independently, each reporting subtle but unsettling observations from months prior. The teacher recalled the girl's increasingly fragile appearance and the unusual way she flinched whenever her father's voice entered the schoolyard. The apothecary mentioned the father's sudden habit of purchasing rope, heavy-duty locks, and medical tonics meant for weak constitutions, though he had no other children and no livestock requiring such supplies. The pastor's wife remembered the girl's brief attendance at Sunday school shortly before her disappearance, noting that the child seemed dazed, as though living in a world half removed from reality. Taken alone, each account might have been dismissed as conjecture, but together they formed a troubling mosaic, sharper at the edges than the constable wished to admit, with pressure mounting from the community and whispers spreading faster than the law could control. An official search of the Whitlock property was finally authorized. What made the search unusual was not the presence of deputies, but the sheer number of townsfolk who gathered near the edge of the yard, holding their breath as the officers approached the house. Few in Millford had ever witnessed a criminal investigation of this nature, and the possibility, however remote, that the missing girl might be found alive fueled a hesitant hope. The officers began with the house itself, moving through the modest kitchen, the sparsely furnished sitting room, and the upstairs bedrooms, each containing evidence of harsh but unremarkable rural living. The structure was simple, improved little over the years, creaking under the weight of age and poor maintenance, giving no immediate sign of wrongdoing. It was only when they reached the cellar door, located behind the kitchen pantry, that the atmosphere shifted. The door was secured by a heavy chain and padlock, an unusual precaution for a cellar in any household, let alone one belonging to a man of limited means. Charles insisted it was to keep rats from spoiling the potatoes he stored below, but the explanation faltered under scrutiny. The lock was new and industrial in strength, far exceeding what one would use for pests. Moreover, when asked for the key, Charles hesitated, his hands trembling just enough to betray his composure. At that moment, the constable, a normally patient man, felt the last threads of benefit of doubt slip through his grasp. He ordered the lock broken. When the cellar door swung open, a cool, stale air seeped upward, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of damp stone and long-contained isolation. The deputies proceeded down the narrow wooden steps, their lanterns casting slow, deliberate arcs of light across the earthen floor. The space was cramped, the walls built of rough-cut stone, the ceiling low enough that the taller deputy had to stoop as he advanced. And then, as the lamplight settled into the deeper corners, they saw her thin, frightened, and chained to one of the supporting beams, her wrists raw and her clothing little more than torn fabric. She shielded her eyes from the lantern glow, blinking rapidly, as though the world beyond the cellar had become incomprehensible in brightness and scale. She did not speak at first. She merely watched, frozen by fear and disbelief, as the deputies approached. The shock that later swept through Millford was unlike anything the town had ever experienced. News traveled swiftly, carried by trembling voices and disbelieving whispers. Some fainted when they heard. Others wept openly. A few reacted with anger, directing their fury not only at the father but at themselves, feeling that they had somehow failed to recognize the silent suffering occurring in their midst. The church bell rang out the following morning, not in celebration or warning, but as a solemn acknowledgement of the collective grief that now coated the community like winter ash. The local paper published an emergency broadsheet detailing the discovery in the most sensitive language available to its editor, taking care to avoid sensationalism while still conveying the gravity of the ordeal. For the authorities, the immediate priority became the girl's recovery, both physical and emotional. Physicians from the nearest county seat arrived to examine her, concluding that, although she bore signs of long-term deprivation and psychological trauma, she was likely to survive with appropriate care. She was moved to the pastor's residence, considered a neutral and compassionate place where she could be attended by women of the congregation while remaining accessible to medical staff. The process of gaining her trust was slow. She recoiled from loud noises and sudden movements, reacted with confusion to sunlight, and often wrapped herself in blankets, even when the weather was warm. But there were glimpses of resilience, moments when she would accept a cup of warm broth, or when her eyes would settle calmly on a familiar face, recognizing safety where there had once been only fear. Meanwhile, the constable compiled the details of the investigation, distilling months of uncertainty into a coherent report. He recorded the inconsistencies in Charles's statements, the testimony of townspeople, the condition of the cellar, and the state in which the girl was found. Specialists from the state capitol were expected to review the evidence, though delays were inevitable due to the limited communication and travel options of the time. In the interim, Charles was held in a makeshift cell adjacent to the town hall, where he remained largely silent, occasionally murmuring incoherently about protecting his daughter from imagined threats. Whether his actions stemmed from genuine delusion or from something darker remained a question that would later occupy courtroom discussions. But for now, the priority was ensuring he could not harm anyone further. As spring approached, Millford found itself navigating an uneasy balance between grief and hope. The discovery of the girl had opened wounds in the town. It's a collective conscience, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable truths about mental illness, communal responsibility, and the fragile line between eccentricity and danger. Yet it also brought forth acts of kindness, rarely displayed so openly. Families delivering food to the pastor's house, farmers offering to repair the cellar door so it could never again be misused, and schoolchildren creating handmade tokens of comfort, hoping the girl might someday feel the warmth of belonging again. In an era defined by practical hardship and social restraint, such expressions of compassion carried extraordinary weight. By the time the girl gained enough strength to walk through the pastor's garden tentatively, with a shawl around her shoulders, the town began to believe that healing, though slow and uncertain, was possible. The trauma of the cellar would not vanish quickly, nor would the scars of confinement fade but the community that had once overlooked the signs of her suffering now became the foundation of her recovery. And as the constable prepared for the legal proceedings that inevitably awaited, he took small comfort in knowing that the child was safe at last. Her second chance, shaped not by the darkness that had confined her, but by the collective will of those determined to bring her back into the light. When the authorities finally intervened, the town of Maple Hollow found itself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. Investigations in the early 1900s were rarely swift, and even less often thorough. Yet the disappearance of a child could arouse even the most complacent constable. In the weeks following the girl's discovery, the local sheriff's office, the county magistrate, and a handful of medical professionals attempted to reconstruct the truth of what had taken place inside the Merrow family home. Their efforts were hampered by the father's evasions, the neighbors' half-whispered recollections, and the limitations of contemporary forensic methods. But little by little, the layers of secrecy that had shrouded the case began to fall away. The father, Leonard Merrow, was known throughout the county as a quiet, almost reclusive man. No one had ever considered him dangerous, merely peculiar in a way that rural communities of the era often tolerated without suspicion. He kept to himself, tended to his small carpentry business, and exchanged only the most necessary pleasantries with those who passed by his shop. His wife had died several years earlier, a loss that had further withdrawn him from the patterns of communal life. At the time, the townspeople had simply mourned with him and then moved on, assuming that his silence was nothing more than grief. Only in retrospect did they recall moments that now carried a different weight. The way he rarely allowed visitors near his home, the shutters always drawn, a fenced yard that seemed more like a barrier than a boundary. The investigation revealed that his daughter had not vanished in the wandering, tragic manner the newspapers initially reported. Instead, she had been kept hidden within the confines of her own home, concealed from the world rather than taken from it. The authorities approached the matter with discretion, careful not to inflame public sentiment. Yet the very nature of the discovery ensured that rumors spread faster than official statements. Soon, every household in Maple Hollow whispered its own version of the Marrow affair. Some spoke of madness inherited through bloodlines, others of a misguided attempt at protection, and a few, more severe in judgment, insisted upon pure malice. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between, tangled in the father S. declining mental state. Then the girl S. lost years. The girl, Eleanor, became the central figure of an inquiry that would set the community on edge. Physicians noted her fragility, not in the physical sense alone, but in her manner of speech, her hesitation when facing open spaces, and her uncertainty when confronted with strangers. The world she had known for 2 years was confined, regimented, and controlled by a man whose perception of reality had been slowly deteriorating. Now she faced an overwhelming expanse of sensations, people, and expectations. The medical examinations were cautious, conducted with a mixture of professionalism and sympathy. Though the practices of the early 20th century lacked the vocabulary to fully understand her condition, terms like nervous exhaustion, melancholia, and mental strain appeared frequently in the written reports, each an attempt to capture what Eleanor herself had no words for. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings moved forward with an unhurried deliberation typical of the era. The judge overseeing the case insisted on calm, insisting that no man should be condemned by the force of emotion alone. Leonard Morrow was evaluated by physicians who described his mind as disturbed, likely affected by prolonged grief, a diagnosis that carried both ambiguity and gravity. His actions, they argued, stemmed not from cruelty in its purest form, but from a delusion that convinced him that the outside world posed an imminent danger to his daughter. Whether this originated from paranoia, unresolved trauma, or an illness no one yet understood, the court could not fully determine. What mattered most was that Eleanor was safe at last, and that her father, incapable of comprehending the consequences of his decisions, could no longer harm her with his misguided attempts at protection. The townspeople found themselves divided. Older residents, shaped by years of hardship and loss, sympathized with the idea of a mind unraveled by tragedy. Their own histories held griefs that might have pushed them to the edge of reason had circumstances been only slightly different. Younger families, meanwhile, viewed the case with sharper judgment, insisting that no sorrow could justify such concealment. They demanded stricter oversight of households in their community, a demand that reflected their fears more than any practical solution. Newspapers from nearby towns soon dispatched reporters, eager to present Maple Hollow as a place grappling with an extraordinary scandal. Articles spoke of the girl in the cellar and the carpenter's delusion, transforming the town's private sorrow into a regional curiosity. For Eleanor, however, the world outside the cellar was far more overwhelming than the public discourse unfolding around her. She was placed in the care of a local matron, a widow with no children of her own, who offered stability and kindness without intrusion. The transition into ordinary life was slow. Eleanor walked through open fields with hesitance, spoke in soft tones as though afraid her voice might travel too far, and reacted with instinctive withdrawal when confronted with sudden noises or unfamiliar faces. Her recovery was less a matter of medical intervention than of rebuilding trust in a world she had been taught to fear. The town's support gradually became more cohesive as the months passed. Churches organized small collections to support her needs. Neighbors offered clothing, and school teachers prepared lessons tailored to her pace of learning. In an age without modern psychology, their compassion served as the closest equivalent. Though the community had been shaken, there was a shared determination to give the girl what her father S' troubled mind had denied her a life shaped not by confinement but by connection. By the time the year drew to a close, the scandal had quieted, replaced by the steady rhythm of rural life, yet its impact lingered. Maple Hollow had been reminded that tragedy could unfold quietly behind the walls of even the most ordinary homes. Eleanora's story became a cautionary tale, told in gentle tones to emphasize vigilance and empathy rather than fear. And though the documents of the case would eventually be archived among other county records, the memory of the girl who stepped from darkness back into daylight endured, carried in the minds of those who had witnessed her return to the world. In the months following the girl's rescue, St. Albans became a town divided between disbelief and shame. Newspapers from neighboring counties printed restrained accounts of the case, careful not to dwell on cruelty yet firm in acknowledging that such an ordeal had unfolded in an otherwise quiet settlement. Citizens who once prided themselves on knowing every family by name now spoke in subdued tones, aware that the secrecy surrounding the father's condition had enabled his long-concealed instability to fester beyond notice. The investigation, though practically concluded, left a lingering sense of incompleteness, as if the community itself had been placed under examination. The authorities worked methodically to reconstruct the lost years, piecing together testimonies from neighbors who admitted they had not seen the girl for so long that her absence had become uncomfortably easy to rationalize. Parish records and school logs showed gaps that were quietly explained away at the time, attributed to illness or relocation. And it was these small allowances, these quiet excuses that now weighed heavily on townspeople who wondered how a child could vanish so thoroughly while life continued around her without interruption. The constable's final report did not assign blame to the community, but its factual tone left clear that collective oversight had played a role in the silence that allowed the father's declining mind to shape the girl's world. The father, meanwhile, remained under medical supervision at the county asylum, where physicians described his mental state as fractured beyond coherence. Their correspondence with local officials characterized his condition not in terms of malice, but in terms of progressive paranoia and delusions of protecting the girl from imagined threats. Court proceedings were brief, with the final judgment declaring him unfit for trial and transferring full guardianship of the girl to the state until appropriate long-term arrangements could be made. Even those who condemned him most fiercely recognized that his mind had deteriorated long before society took notice. The tragedy lay in the fact that his illness had not been recognized before it shaped the fate of his own daughter. The girl's recovery unfolded slowly at the county infirmary, where the attending nurses approached her case with the careful patience customarily reserved for the frailest of patients. Her language remained limited, her movements cautious, and her understanding of ordinary household routines fragmentary at best. Yet in her quiet resilience, the staff saw potential for healing that exceeded their initial expectations. She observed others closely, imitating gestures, adjusting gradually to the rhythms of shared meals, fresh air, and predictable daily schedules. Though she scarcely spoke, the physicians noted a steady growth of truce, particularly with the senior matron, who became a figure of stability in the girl's uncertain transition into normal life. Support from the community gathered in the form of donations, clothing, school books, and offers of temporary housing. The local women's charity took a particular interest, organizing weekly visits with the intention of reintroducing the girl to ordinary social interactions. At first, she met these encounters with apprehension, sitting rigidly as if unsure whether she was permitted to relax. But over time, she learned to accept tokens of kindness, a knitted scarf, a small slate for writing lessons, and eventually a hand-carved wooden doll from a carpenter who had no children of his own. Each gesture was small, yet taken together they represented a communal attempt to restore what had been taken from her. Despite these efforts, the authorities remained concerned about her long-term welfare. It was clear she would not simply return to a family home, and discussions arose regarding specialized schooling or placement with relatives, though no relatives could be found. Reports were drafted and archived, noting her progress and outlining the next steps for reintegration into society. The tone of these documents reflected the broader recognition that her case was not merely an isolated incident but an illustration of how fragile the boundary between neglect and normalcy could be, especially in a time when mental illness was poorly understood and rarely addressed until it had already shaped the lives of those closest to the afflicted. As winter approached, a decision was made to transfer her to a residential school, known for its structured environment an emphasis on individualized education. The transition was recorded in official documents with careful justification. The school's calm setting, its experienced staff, and its distance from the environment associated with their confinement. When the day arrived, townspeople gathered discreetly along the road to see her leave, not out of spectacle but as a quiet acknowledgement that her fate had become intertwined with their own conscience. She sat in the carriage beside the matron, holding the wooden doll, her expression unreadable yet notably absent of fear. By the year's end, St. Aldwyn's resumed its outward calm, though the case remained present in the collective memory as a sobering reminder of the hidden struggles that could lie behind closed doors. Public meetings were held to improve oversight of vulnerable families, and the constable's office implemented new procedures for welfare checks. Modest, but earnest attempts to prevent such an omission from ever repeating. The girl's story, though painful, had prompted a long overdue scrutiny of assumptions held for generations that stability was the default state of every household, and that absence of trouble meant presence of well-being. Sometimes it grows in silence, unnoticed until someone finally looks closely enough to see what had been there all along. The small town had been steeped in shock for weeks following the revelation of the girl's captivity. Newspapers carried long accounts of her ordeal, describing the chains that had bound her, the darkness of the cellar, and the isolation she had endured for 2 years. For the citizens, the truth was almost unbearable. Mothers who had imagined their children lost in similar circumstances wept quietly in corners of their homes. Fathers stared in disbelief, shaking their heads at the failure of vigilance. Yet, amid the horror, there was a rising sense of collective responsibility. The town, once divided by gossip and fear, united in the mission of restoring the girl to a life she had been cruelly denied. Medical professionals oversaw her physical recovery first, attending to the malnutrition and muscle atrophy that had resulted from prolonged confinement. Her body was small and fragile, yet resilient. Every measured improvement in weight and strength was celebrated with cautious optimism. Doctors and nurses documented the progress meticulously, noting how the human body, even under the most extreme deprivation, could begin to heal with care and proper nutrition. The girl's face, pale and hollow when first removed from the cellar, gradually regained softness, though her eyes retained a haunted vigilance that betrayed the psychological scars she could not yet articulate. Psychologists and social workers took the next step, tending to her mind. The early 20th century did not yet possess the language or understanding to fully articulate the trauma she had suffered, but compassionate attention and gentle guidance helped her to navigate a world that had previously been forbidden. Every new sound, every sunlit room, was an exploration. Staff observed how she flinched at sudden movements, how she recoiled from hands reaching toward her, how she spoke in whispered fragments before attempting full sentences. Slowly, over months of patient encouragement, she began to emerge from the shell the cellar had imposed. The father's arrest and subsequent trial cast a long shadow over the town. Legal proceedings in the 1900s were conducted with a procedural rigor that contrasted sharply with the raw emotional toll on those involved. Neighbors, once supportive or indifferent, now testified to subtle signs they had observed over the years. The father's isolationist tendencies, the daughter's absence from public view, the rare glimpses of shadows at the window. The trial revealed not just the acts themselves, but the consequences of a community's inattentiveness. A cautionary tale recorded in court transcripts for generations to study. Community members volunteered in the girl's reintegration, offering small but meaningful gestures. A new dress, a warm meal, the gentle encouragement of ordinary conversation. Schools adapted to her needs, allowing her a measured introduction to learning and interaction. Children of similar age approached with tentative curiosity, sometimes fearful, sometimes fascinated by the resilience evident in one so young yet so changed. She learned the rhythm of daily life, slowly, guided by patient mentors who understood that the transition from captivity to freedom required both structure and empathy. As the months passed, The girl's recovery became a symbol of collective healing. She began to smile without restraint, to speak in complete sentences, and to participate in community activities that had once been unimaginable. Photographs captured her progress, showing the gradual reassertion of normalcy, though the memory of the cellar and the chains remained etched in her consciousness, a reminder of vulnerability and survival. Local historians later documented the case not solely as an instance of horror, but as an illustration of human resilience, a study in how society could respond with compassion and structured intervention to restore the life of one young victim. Eventually, she moved to a stable foster environment under the supervision of social services. The transition marked a turning point. While the memories of her confinement remained, the structure and predictability of daily life provided a foundation for growth. Letters and updates from the town chronicled her progress, celebrated quietly in households that had once known only fear and suspicion. Over the years, the girl developed skills, friendships, and confidence, guided by mentors who ensured her history did not define her future. The story of her captivity and eventual recovery became a cornerstone of civic education. Lectures at schools, accounts in local newspapers, and police records highlighted both the dangers of neglect and the capacity for restoration when a community responded collectively. While the father remained a cautionary footnote in legal history, the narrative centered on the child's reclamation of autonomy, the steady process by which a fractured life could be pieced together with vigilance, empathy, and consistent care. By the end of the decade, the town had moved beyond immediate fear. Streets once associated with suspicion regained ordinary life. Neighbors exchanged pleasantries rather than guarded glances. The girl, now older, attended school openly, participated in social events, and pursued simple joys that were previously denied. Though shadows of her past lingered privately, they did not dominate her life. The final records of the case emphasized recovery, community action, and the fragile but enduring nature of human resilience. In every narrative account, she was no longer merely a victim. She became a symbol of survival, an emblem of what a dedicated community could achieve when horror was met with responsibility, care, and unwavering attention to the vulnerable.